Episode 204 of CppCast with guest Ivan Čukić, recorded June 27th, 2019. Sponsor of this episode of CppCast is the PVS Studio team. The team promotes regular usage of static code analysis and the PVS Studio static analysis tool. And by JetBrains, maker of intelligent development tools to simplify your challenging tasks and automate the routine ones. JetBrains is offering a 25% discount for an individual license on the C++ tool of your choice, CLion, ReSharper C++, or AppCode. Use the coupon code JetBrains for CppCast during checkout at jetbrains.com. In this episode, we discuss papers going into the Cologne meeting. Then we talk to book author Ivan Čukić. Ivan tells us about functional programming with C++. Welcome to episode 204 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how's it going today?
I'm doing all right, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are the Netherlands?
Yeah, I am traveling right now. And last year when I was here, it was record-breaking heat. And then I was in Israel for Core C++, which was record-breaking heat for May, and now I am in the middle of a record-breaking heat wave again here in the Netherlands. It's very exciting.
Yeah, you're just getting really lucky there with that travel, I guess.
Yeah, the most exciting part of it is no one in the Netherlands really has air conditioning because they theoretically don't need it except for when I am visiting.
The heat waves are pretty rare over there, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, to put it in comparison, like it's pretty rare for it to get over about 82 degrees or something like that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you come home soon so you can relieve the rest of the people over there in the Netherlands.
Yes, I apologize for our Dutch listeners here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the top first, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week, I got a Twitter message from Chris Tao. Saying, "Hi guys, great job, love your podcast. Could you mention on air that Cardiff, Wales has their own first meetup for C++ Rust developers? And they're looking for enthusiasts to improve our skills by sharing knowledge and having fun." And he sent me a link for the Rust and C++ Cardiff, Wales meetup. So I will share that in the show notes. Yeah, and it looks like they're getting some interest. They already have 78 members signed up on Meetup. And I think they already had one event, I think a week ago. But I'm sure will have more upcoming. And yeah, if you're anywhere near Cardiff, Wales, go check out this new C++ and Rust Meetup.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder how they're going to handle topics. 'Cause I haven't heard of like combined language meetups like this. Like, do they take turns? Do they try to talk about both Rust and C++ during each meetup? I don't know.
Maybe they have like a battle or something at each meetup to see which one is the better language on a certain topic or something.
That sounds like it'd be pretty combative.
Yeah,
fighting that out every month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or subscribe on YouTube. Joining us today is Ivan Čukić. He is the author of Functional Programming in C++, published by Manning. He's one of the core developers of KDE, the largest free Libre open source C++ project. And he's also teaching modern C++ techniques and functional programming at the Faculty of Mathematics in Belgrade and has been using C++ for more than 20 years. He's been researching functional programming in C++ before and during his PhD studies and uses the technique in real-world projects. Ivan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm curious, like, how long have you been with the KDE project?
For more than 10 years now.
More than 10 years. Wow. Now, I guess for history for our listeners, I guess, would you mind like explaining what KDE is and how long it has been around?
So, to be honest, I think it has been around for, 25 years or something like that. The idea was in the beginning to create a graphical environment for Unix. And obviously it grew up when Linux became popular, etc. And now it's not only the desktop environment. Now we have Office suites, we have artists, painting applications, and everything else. In essence, it's just a huge community of C++ and Qt developers working on beautiful things.
Yeah, so I guess that's the other relevant bit of information is KDE uses Qt for all of its GUI aspects, right?
Yeah. In essence, for most of it, obviously we have some, we also have frameworks, so the libraries for extending, for example, Qt library is kind of comprehensive, but they still lack stuff like, zip or archival support and stuff. So we do provide libraries for any Qt application or any C++ application to use to extend, not to re-implement all the functionalities, exactly like supporting zips, tars, etc. So
very cool.
This was a little bit of an awful explanation because I just mentioned one of the frameworks, but for people who are interested, just go to Google and search for KDE frameworks, and you'll get a few dozen libraries that you can use in your regular projects.
Very cool. Okay, well, Ivan, we have a couple news articles to discuss. Feel free to comment on any of these, and then we'll start talking more about functional programming in your book, okay?
Okay, of course.
So this first one is the JetBrains State of the Developer Ecosystem for C++ 2019. And these are just the results from a survey they sent out and compiled together. And I think we've gone over this in past years. There's definitely some good trends to see here, like over 60% of listeners responded that they were using C++ 11. Very, very few responders are still using C++ 98 or 03, which is great. There's only like 20% are still using the older versions.
Although, to be honest, for people who use the old versions, I don't expect them to have seen the questionnaire. And,
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bit of a self-selection bias with the people who are responding to this. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Any other results that you guys wanted to highlight? One of the other interesting things was they're continuing to see CMake take over the other build systems. They said it beat out Visual Studio last year, and it's since gained another 5% on top of Visual Studio. Thought that was interesting.
Yeah, love it or hate it, it's our standard at the moment, really.
Yeah. Even Qt is going to switch to CMake in Qt 6.
Is that right? Does that mean that they are dropping QMake altogether?
So they, a couple of years ago, they started developing a new build system called QBS. And they kind of abandoned it in favor of CMake for Qt 6. I think that QMake is still going to be supported because a lot of projects currently use it. But Qt itself will be built with CMake.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's been a big change over the last 10 years or so, watching all this kind of thing happen.
Okay. And then the next thing we have is voting on the talks for Meeting C++ 2019. And Jason, do you recall if they did this before, where they allow just any attendee or just any member of the Meeting C++ community to vote on which talks they want to see at the conference? I don't recall seeing this last year.
I believe it was only current or past ticket holders on previous years.
Okay.
And speakers,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's opened up to just anyone who has an account with Meeting C++ who wants to go on and vote.
I'm not sure.
Cool. It is, because I created an account when I saw this article, and I was able to go in and look at some of the session descriptions and vote. Yeah.
Okay.
So did you go and vote for random talks?
I flipped through a couple of them. I didn't go through every single talk. I will say it'd be nice if you could get kind of an overall list of what all the sessions are. You kind of need to just go through each one and assign it a rating. So I think the UI for going through it could be a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, he says the only requirement is that you have a Meeting C++ account or have purchased a ticket for this year's conference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so neat idea, though, to let every single, possible attendee go and vote for the talks they want to see.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And then last thing we have is that the ISO C++ pre-Cologne mailing has gone out. I didn't see what the number of talks was, so I'm not sure how it compared to the last two where they were kind of setting record numbers, but it seems to be a pretty sizable mailing.
Papers, yeah.
Number of papers, yeah. Do you have any involvement with the ISO committee even?
Not really. I'm only a member of the SG20 education study group.
Oh, okay.
In essence, a few times I wanted to write a paper on something, and then I realized it's a little bit too legalese for me.
Yeah.
There are definitely a few things that stand out to me on here.
Sure, go ahead.
The invitation for the 2020 Prague meeting will be is one of the top papers. So 2020, the first meeting of 2020 is in Prague at Avast. So that's interesting. And I noticed one of the top things I noticed was a paper from Ben Dean here, because apparently all of the recent papers to make sure that standard algorithms were const spurred missed the algorithms that are actually in the numeric header.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. So that's like, oops, because that's, accumulate, one of the more common ones to use.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I noticed was that the 2D graphics proposal seems to be back. There's an update to that paper, with Guy Davidson, Herb Sutter, Michael McLaughlin. I'm surprised to see that one coming back, but I guess they never fully let it die because they were trying to get it through the British standards body.
Yeah.
They invested a lot of time. So
yeah, and they did invest a lot of time
to push it.
Yeah. Any other specific papers either of you wanted to call out?
I would say STD expected. Yeah, we should finally get something that some other languages I'm not going to mention have had a long time ago.
I also saw... Oh, go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead, Rob. Sorry. I'll come back to it in a second. I
was just going to say, I also saw this paper saying to boldly suggest an overall plan for C++ 23. So, actually upfront commit to what types of features they want to be able to bring to the table when C++ 23 is ready to be finalized. So I thought that was interesting to try to get upfront and get agreement on what to focus on for the kind of next cycle. I thought that seemed like a good idea.
Who is on that paper?
I'm not going to pronounce the name, but Ville Voutilainen.
Okay, Ville, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he's suggesting that library support for coroutines, executors, and networking should be the most important, feature deliverables for C++ 23. And reflection and pattern matching should either make progress or get into C++ 23 as well.
All right, cool.
Yeah, it seems like a good list of things to try to get in. Yeah.
There's one here, no discard for constructors. So being able to mark types, or mark constructors as no discard. Yeah, that one struck me as interesting.
I've had a lot of students that when they try to do RAI, they just create a temporary and it just gets destroyed at the semicolon. So this could be quite useful.
And that, I guess that might stop people that do weird hacks like using the comma operator to create a mutex for just the lifetime of an assignment operation. Have you seen that one? That's
not in the real life.
I think I know really people who have. Yeah, I know people who've done it in real life. I think not that I would recommend it.
Okay, well, moving on from this, let's start talking about functional programming. And for our listeners, should we maybe start with an overview of what exactly functional programming is and how it differs from object-oriented programming that might be a little bit more familiar?
Now, I have to say that I had that question. In essence, that was one of the most difficult things to to write in the book because the publisher wanted me to make a clear distinction and show how FP is much better than OOP. For me, it's both of them are set of techniques, and you can mix and match those techniques. With functional programming, the idea is that you're not creating abstractions over data like in OOP, but mostly abstractions over functions. So, for example, STD algorithms like STD accumulates and stuff, that can be called functional programming in, let's say, C++ style.
Okay.
So I would say just a set of practices that rely on abstractions to make your code a little bit shorter and a little bit safer.
That makes sense. So it's not better than object-oriented programming or anything like that in your opinion, from what you're saying. It's another tool in our tool bag.
Yeah. Obviously, again, with OOP, you have good OOP and bad OOP. I would say that functional programming is better than bad OOP, and it can be mixed and matched with good OOP.
So, bad functional programming is no. Yes, okay, got it.
So, is C++ like an effective language with functional programming? Because I know there are certain languages that are kind of made to be functional programming languages, like Haskell is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention
the
Haskell, but okay. In essence, I really love Haskell, but the thing that I do mind is that I don't want the language to put, let's say, chains on me and force me to do something in a certain way. In C++, we can do whatever we want, and we can even do functional programming. In Haskell, if you want to make something, because it's a pure language, if you want to change state, you need to go through all the hoops to simulate mutable state. And obviously people claim that it's still much more easy to reason about because it's still pure. But I have a beautiful counter-argument. There was a paper called Lambda, the Ultimate Imperative, where everything was implemented just in C style in Haskell. Just imagine a C program written in Haskell syntax. It's completely unreadable, both of them. So I wouldn't say that purity by itself and enforcement on the language is a good thing. With C++, the great thing is that we can create let's say, not the same, but similar abstractions like in Haskell and write, let's say, more brief code and safer code than normal C++ is.
So I kind of want to take just a little bit of a step back, maybe, and ask, why were you inspired to write this book in the first place?
Okay, that's a fun story, at least for me.
Okay.
All the conferences that I went to, so meeting C++ and stuff, after I usually give talks about monads and other functional things. And after that, usually you have a beer party or something like that, and you get a group of people that like functional programming. And the conclusion was always that we would all love to have a book on functional programming in C++ so that we could learn something more. And obviously nobody wanted to write the book. And at some point, me neither. And at some point Manning approached me to write it, and I said, I really don't wanna. But then I realized, okay, if everybody says I don't wanna, we are never going to get a functional programming book in C++. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I said kinda, okay. I had absolutely no idea what I'm doing, and I had no idea how much time it will take. Writing books is not really an easy job.
I have heard it takes a considerable amount of effort, in fact.
Yeah. Especially, so I've heard that when you do self-publishing, then it's a little bit lighter on you. But when you have a professional publishing company behind, for each of the chapters you have at least 3 revisions, 3 dozen different people go through your wording and everything else, and then try to fix it to fit the style of the publisher, etc. So, in essence, if you were just writing chapters like blog posts, it would be much more simple. But the fact that you need to rewind, and revise everything, it was a little bit painful.
So how much effort can you estimate? how long it took for people who are maybe considering writing a book with a publisher?
So they told me that, let's say, normal authors write one chapter per month. And
okay.
for me, it was completely unrealistic. In essence, it would mean that my book should have been written in a year. It was in kind of 2 years.
3 years. Okay, so you wrote one chapter every 3 months, basically, is what you're saying.
2 years, not 3.
Oh, okay.
So let's say one chapter every 2 months. Although, again, it's not the problem that it took 2 months. Each chapter took, let's say, 1.5, and all the revisions took the rest of the time.
Right.
Okay. So ultimately, you were approached by Manning. You went ahead and went with it. And has it gone well? Are you glad that you went through the effort now?
Yeah, of course. So even if it took a lot of time and some parts were painful, but I have really learned a lot on how to write. Manning does have some strange guidelines with writing, but it was amazing how... So I had a couple of developmental editors or something like that, and they really taught me how to present things, and that readers really love when you say the same thing in 3 different ways. One with a picture and 2 different ways to explain something in words. And obviously they forced me to do the same thing through the whole book. And I'm really grateful for let's say, those people that helped me write it. It's an amazing experience. It doesn't really pay off that well, but as an experience, it's something that I recommend.
Well, the book has been very well received, too. I know I've seen lots of good blog posts reviewing the book, and actually met a listener in person who highly recommended it and actually asked me to try to get you on the show several months back. So has that been the case? You've gotten lots of good feedback?
So I didn't expect it to, let's say, be a popular C++ book, because nobody wants to read functional programming in C++. But people who have read it, they mostly had positive impressions, and often at all of the conferences, people approach me to sign, to at least say hello, etc. So with that in mind, I really don't care whether the book brings me any money or anything else. For me, the main point of the book is to give something to the C++ community back, because I have learned a lot by listening to people at conferences and reading other people's books.
Cool.
Now, I am one of those listeners, I guess. Am I a listener of CppCast, Rob?
Not technically, no.
No.
Not in a long time.
I am one of those who has purchased your book, and I have gotten started with it. I've read the introduction, and I'm excited to dig in, but I find myself mostly wanting to read like on an airplane or something, because I do a lot of travel. But I want to have my laptop available to be able to practice the stuff that you're talking about. And I just, would you recommend that I do have my laptop with a compiler available while reading it? Or do you think it's something that you can just kind of casually read?
Well, if you want to read it just once, then I would say bring your laptop with you. Otherwise, the main point in that is that the ideas behind all the functional stuff. Now, I don't expect you to actually need a compiler for you to read the code and know what it is doing, because I'm not doing anything that insane. But let's say for an average listener, I would say it's useful to have a compiler nearby.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I want to interrupt the discussion for just a moment to bring you a word from our sponsors. PVS Studio is a tool for detecting bugs and security weaknesses in the source code of programs written in C, C++, C#, and Java. It works under 64-bit systems in Windows, Linux, and macOS environments, and can analyze source code intended for 32-bit, 64-bit, and embedded ARM platforms. The PVS Studio team writes a large number of articles on the analysis of well-known open-source projects. These articles can be a great source of inspiration to improve your programming practices. By studying the error patterns, you can improve your company's coding standards, as well as adopt good programming practices which protect from typical errors. For example, you can stop being greedy on parentheses when writing complex expressions involving ternary operators. Subscribe to Facebook, Telegram, or Twitter to be informed about all publications by the PVS Studio team. Links are given in the podcast show notes for this episode. Could we maybe dig into some of the concepts of functional programming that you go over in the book? Like where would be a good place to start?
So the first part that I tried to stress out, and a couple of people complained about it, is that for me functional programming is primarily about higher order functions. So functions that can accept other functions as arguments, or functions that return new functions as the result. And I tried to convey that STL algorithms, and a lot of STL is actually, even if it's a little bit strange functional, it is functional. All the algorithms are higher order functions, etc. And obviously during the review process I had quite a few complaints that I'm not talking about functional programming, I'm talking about STL. But that's the first step that I would say people need to understand. Functional programming is not something that is completely strange and foreign. It's something that they have been, at least to some extent, used in normal C++. So I would say that's the first step, using higher order functions to do fun things like algorithms.
Okay.
And after that, obviously, you have quite a few crazy concepts like monads, unions, and stuff. Although I don't think
you did it. You mentioned.
Did the M word.
Sorry. Yeah, you said the M word. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish your sentence, though, please.
I just wanted to say that unions are no longer that foreign. Although neither are monads. We have a couple of them in the standard nowadays.
Okay, now you've said it twice. So what you have to do now is, you have to succinctly describe to us what a monad is.
Is that a requirement for the show, or?
Okay, how about we do this differently? You said we have a couple in the standard and they're no longer foreign to us. Tell us what in the standard is a monad, perhaps.
So, for example, STD optional.
Okay.
And although we are kind of currently missing some APIs for it to be a proper monad, and thanks to Simon, we should be getting that in, I think, 20 or 23. I haven't really followed. In essence, if you want to have a function that returns an STD optional, what would be the reason for returning optional instead of a proper value? That's a question for you.
What would be the purpose? I really do not like interfaces that return optionals. But I would say if you were to return an optional, it's because the value may or may not be available, I guess. Like perhaps if you were doing a lookup in a map.
Yeah, for example. So you have, you can either throw an exception, or you can somehow report an error, etc. And one of the ways to report an error is by just saying, I can return a value or I can return nothing. And, for example, when you get that optional, it's sometimes a little bit tedious to deal with optional values, because usually when you deal with them, it's like with pointers. If this is not a null opt, then do something with the value. So the first step with optionals is to try to think of them like ranges or collections or something else. We have std transform, and std transforms gets a collection of values and returns a collection of transformed values. Conceptually, not literally, right? And the same thing can be applied to an optional. If, for example, you said, we have a map, and just imagine the map is mapping login users to the user object that has a name and surname, etc. So your function returns optional of user type. And the question is, how then you can just say, okay, I don't care about the whole type, I just care about the person's name. You can just say transform the optional object and transform it to extract the name, instead of doing all the dance with ifs and thens, etc. Okay?
Okay.
This is a little bit difficult to explain audio only, but I'll try. So you can do the transformations, and you can, for example, after when you transform, you're going to get std optional of string because you extracted the name. But if the person didn't exist, then you couldn't have extracted the name. Fine?
Okay.
Next transformation can be convert string to uppercase. And again, you can chain the transformations on the optional object, and you will just get the transformed, well, again, optional of the transformed value. And until this point, this is not yet a monad. This is something that's called a functor. And I'm trying hard to convince all the C++ people not to use functor for function objects because of this. Anything that has a transform is a functor. And then The next step is, what if all the transformation functions that you use to transform the optional don't actually return a proper value, but they themselves return an optional? Okay?
Okay.
So, for example, just imagine that the function that converts the string to uppercase can sometimes fail and sometimes returns nothing. If you try to use normal transform on an optional, you would just get optional of something instead of just an optional.
Mm-hmm.
And if you chain 10 of those functions, you will get optional of string, which is kind of useless.
Right, you're no better off. You're worse off in some sense.
Yeah, it's much worse. And the main point of monads is that they don't do just transformation, but remove one of the nesting from the optional. So if you have, let's say, 10 of these partial functions that return optional values, you can compose them just like normal functions, and in the end you're going just to get an optional of a value and not optional of optional, etc.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Now, the problem with monads is that when you...
I was just going to say that doesn't sound too bad, and you're like, now the problem.
No. So the point is that it's not too bad. The problem is that all the people that try to investigate monads first encounter Haskell and the input-output monad, because Haskell doesn't support state. They needed to use monads to simulate input and output. And most of the people who encounter monads first go to that, and then everything is completely, I'm trying to find a word that is, that I should say
colored?
While being recorded. Sorry?
Tainted by, colored by?
No. I wanted to say something that is a little bit rude, but...
Okay, sorry.
Just messed up?
So messed up is a nice word. So you just get confused by all the stuff, and monads are quite a simple concept. Just if you start thinking about removing the nesting after transformation, then it makes sense for optionals, for expecteds, for std future, etc.
Okay.
Even for ranges.
You started to say something, and I want to make sure if I heard you. I mean, you kind of we think of transform over a container, and I know there have been people that are like, well, we should treat optional as a container of 0 to 1 things, and I think I saw a proposal even to extend begin and end and size and the free functions to work on optionals and that kind of thing, so we can truly treat them like containers and use them with the algorithms. Is that like in the direction you would head personally, or not? Or am I misunderstanding something?
Yeah, I've quite a few times I've implemented begin and end for optionals.
Okay.
If nothing else, just imagine you know the ranges syntax with pipes and all the beauty of ranges. And just imagine on the left-hand side you just replace the vector of x's with an optional without changing any syntax whatsoever. If optional was a proper collection, it would be possible. And that's one of the coolest things about abstractions, is that they allow you to use the completely same code without any changes for completely different things. Just imagine replacing, ranges with reactive streams. It could be the same syntax, just with the completely different semantics that you're processing an event stream instead of processing a collection.
Okay. Now, as someone, I personally don't have any problem with exceptions at all, which I know puts me in a rare place these days. But if an error occurs, you get an exception, you catch it, you have a description of what the error was. So like the .at interface for map, not that I use it all the time, but, being able to catch instead of, having to go through a bunch of other steps. And what I am a little lost on is with this optional monadic kind of interface. And, well, by the way, I did find that paper, Simon Brand. It's P0798R3 was the last version of it. From monadic operations for optional. And you're talking about a transform of get a person's name, get the first name, do a capitalization of it. And you said, like any one of those steps could potentially fail, so they could all potentially return optionals. Well, if the 5th out of 9 steps is the one that fails, how do I know that it was the 5th step that failed?
That's an excellent question. So optional just deals with whether the value exists or not. if you want to have the information about the reason why the value doesn't exist, then you should use std_expected from P03 to 3R8. So expected is kind of like an optional, but instead of being a value or nothing, it's a value or an error. And if you have the functions that can fail, each of those will return a value or an explanation why it failed. And obviously, when you have the composition, as soon as any of them return an error, you just immediately jump out just like you would with the normal exceptions. You just immediately return the error as a result. The reason why I think that this is a little bit better than exceptions is, for example, in distributed systems. When you have a border between two processes, you can't really transfer an exception through that. If an exception occurs in one of them, you would need to have a really, really beautiful logic to handle that exception and somehow propagate it. If errors are just normal values, you can just serialize the value and pass it on using the same mechanism that you pass normal values through.
Okay, I accept that, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about monads. What are some of the other kind of core concepts that we should really go over for an overview of functional programming?
One of the other things that I talked a lot and try to emphasize that kind of belongs to functional programming, but it's really beautiful with C++ are the unions or std variant. So I've seen recently a blog post, somebody implemented a game with std variant. I forgot whose blog post it was.
I think we talked about that last week, the spaceship game.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Maybe. So unions are one thing that is really, really used a lot in functional languages. And in C++, it gives more power to RII than normal classes would. Just imagine the following. My usual example is if you want to write a program that connects to a web server and fetches a web page and counts the number of words in a web page. Before you start counting, before you connect, do you need a socket to that web page? Obviously not. So you could just have one state that doesn't essentially remember anything apart from the URL to which you need to connect. Then the next state in the variant could be the state that deals with counting. So it needs to have a socket and it needs to have an int that remembers how many words we have counted so far. Okay? And the last state would be just the result, so constant of how many words we counted. The benefit of this compared to a normal class that you just have count, socket, etc. is that as soon as you switch from one state to another, the destructor of the previous state is called. So the socket is automatically closed and all the resources that you used in the previous state are automatically closed. And you don't need to do that manually like most people do when you just create classes and not variants.
Okay.
I hope I got the point through. I'm not sure. In essence, the point in variant is that it can hold a value of a certain type, of several certain types, right? But just one. And if, for example, you have variant of string and something else, as soon as you store something else in the variant, the destructor of string is called.
Right.
So it frees up all the resources that if you designed it in class, string, and other type, you would need to clear up the string manually when you decide, I no longer need the value. And with variants, it's just automatical.
Okay. I think I've sunk in. So in the spaceship game that we talked about last week, his main point was the author's main point there, I'm not sure who it was that we have, with the variant, you can encapsulate the rest of the state information with each state type that's in the variant. And you're pointing out not only because it carries information, but we can take advantage of the variant to do our RAII resource management for us automatically as well as we transition between states.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I probably just said the exact same thing that you did, but it clicked. Okay.
So are there any particular libraries or anything you would recommend for C++ developers who want to get into functional programming?
So the first one that I would always recommend is obviously ranges. or std ranges for C++20. I would recommend Vicente's... sorry, not my brain is just frozen. I don't know why I said Vicente. I'm looking at his proposal of std expected. So there is a library by Juan Pedro Bolivar, I think.
Oh yeah, he's done a bunch of great talks. Yeah.
Yeah, he has an amazing library that implements immutable collections, really efficient ones that, let's say, are comparable to the best data structures in pure functional languages. So if you want to write pure code in C++, you can check out his library. It's called Immer, IMMER. And you have a really amazing implementation of a vector that is kind of copy and write, but with persistent, all the previous values are still stored if somebody references them, etc. So it's an amazing library. Apart from that, I would say Simon's optional and expected implementations. And I think that's mostly
Simon Brand.
Yeah, Simon Brand.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. And are there any particular types of application that you think are better suited for functional programming, or a combination of functional programming and OO?
So I would say that any application can benefit from some functional concepts.
Okay.
People usually go for the low-hanging fruit of saying when you have multi-threading, then purity is God and everything else. But I really don't care about that stuff. I just like writing short code. I like having less to write, and functional programming is indispensable for it. I don't care how much boilerplate it's in the backend but the main program logic should be as short as possible and as easy to understand as possible. So I would say any application can benefit from some of those functional idioms.
Okay.
I can see that, yeah.
So any other books you might have in the works, or are you pretty happy just putting out this one and then maybe going back to your past career without any more writing? What do you think?
It sounds like you had so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, I did have some fun. So if I ever get a time, 2 years, to do something like this, I might write something else. I recently got an offer to write a book on object-oriented programming in C++, which was quite fun. And I said kind of no. So I don't plan to write anything that serious in the near future, maybe in a couple of years.
Now, referencing the book that you have written and the joking writing an object-oriented programming book, you have said a couple times that functional programming is a tool for us. It's one of many tools. It doesn't replace object-oriented programming. Mm-hmm. In your book, do you address how these tools interact with each other?
So I don't really talk about how to combine object-oriented design with functional. Simply because... So the book is called Functional Programming. My idea was to, let's say, teach more of C++ than people usually get taught during reading normal books. So I wouldn't say that this is a completely separate world or anything else. This is just another book that can improve your C++ toolbox.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think most of the things that I presented there, as I said, I didn't say explicitly how you combine something with OOP. But I think because the book is written for, let's say, experienced C++ developers, I do think that all of them can easily mix and match without any examples for me. Okay,
that makes sense, yeah.
Do you have any upcoming talks or anything planned? It sounds like you do give some talks on functional programming, right?
So, yeah. In the past year, I had a little bit too many. So I kind of decided to rest a bit. So the only plans that I have are meeting C++ and C++ Russia in St. Petersburg.
Okay.
Although I'm trying to move a little bit away from functional programming because I don't want to be forever known as the functional guy.
Okay, well, it's been great having you on the show today, Ivan.
Yeah, it was really fun.
And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. We'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let us know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in, Or if you have a suggestion for a topic, we'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@CppCast.com. We'd also appreciate if you can like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at Lefticus on Twitter. We'd also like to thank all our patrons who help support the show through Patreon. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/CppCast. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com. At CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode was provided by podcastthemes.com.